Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something fascinating, but maybe a bit concerning too. We're looking at the future of robotaxis and asking, well, do we actually have the raw materials to build all the ones people are expecting? For this deep dive, we've gone through quite a stack of sources, mostly recent analysis from the IEA and USGS reports. We're using data current as of May 30, 2025, focusing on their work titled Robotaxis and Critical Mineral Supply Shortages. So our mission today is pretty clear. We want to figure out which specific elements might face supply shortages because robotaxis become widespread. And importantly, when those shortages might get serious and why these reports are flagging these specific risks. Robotaxis aren't just science fiction anymore. They're starting to show up. But are the basic ingredients ready? Let's see what the data says.
Yeah, and that's really the crux of it. I mean, fundamentally, a robotaxi is this blend, right? Autonomous driving tech meets an electric vehicle. The self-driving stuff is all complex sensors and software, sure. But the EV part, that boils down to the battery and the electric motor.
Right, the bits that make it go and store the power. And these aren't simple things. They need specific stuff pulled out of the earth.
Exactly. Those lithium-ion batteries that give robotaxis decent range and let them run all day, they need lithium, cobalt, nickel, and graphite. And then the goaters, especially the efficient ones, they often rely on strong, permanent magnets, and that means neodymium.
Okay, so specific materials needed in presumably huge amounts if robotaxis really take off like predicted. The issue isn't that we don't have any of this stuff, is it? It's more about the sheer speed, the scale of demand hitting the reality of supply chains.
Precisely. That's what the reports really hammer home. This potentially explosive growth in demand, coupled with the fact that supply chains for many of these are really concentrated geographically. That concentration creates a lot of risk. The analysis we looked at really zooms in on 5 key elements here: lithium, neodymium, carbon, specifically graphite, cobalt, and nickel.
All right, let's break those down then, one by one. Starting with lithium. Seems like the poster child for EV batteries. What's its job in a robotaxi battery, and how crazy does that demand picture actually look?
Lithium's absolutely critical. It's, fundamental to the electrolyte, the electrodes in lithium-ion batteries. For a robotaxi needing long operating hours, maybe fast charging, well, good energy storage and range are vital. Lithium delivers that. And the demand figures, they are pretty eye-watering. The IEA's net zero scenario sees lithium demand multiplying 8 times by 2040. But some forecasts are even more, well, aggressive, talking a 9 to 10 times jump just between 2023 and 2030.
Wow, 9 or 10 times in only 7 years. That is a huge ramp up. How does the current supply picture measure against that kind of demand wave?
Well, if we look at the 2024 data, global mine production was about 240,000 tons. Now, the total reserves in the ground are much bigger, estimated around 30 million tons. And the main producers, Australia, Chile, Argentina. So relatively spread out, actually, compared to some of the others we'll get to.
Okay, so plenty in the ground globally. Then where is the shortage risk coming from if it's not a lack of reserves?
Yeah, this is a key point the reports make. Reserves are one thing, but the rate of production is another. Can we actually mine and process it fast enough? That demand surge we just talked about could easily outstrip the capacity of current and planned mines. The IEA actually highlights a potential big gap there. And interestingly, recent low lithium prices have kind of discouraged investment in the new projects needed to close that gap.
So lower prices now might mean less supply later when demand spikes.
Exactly. So even with diverse mining locations, the reports suggest a real risk of an acute shortage popping up in the late 2020s, maybe early 2030s, if production doesn't accelerate significantly.
Okay, so lithium risk. Late 2020s, early 2030s, tied to production ramp-up speed. Got it.
Let's switch from the battery itself to the motor. Neodymium. That's a rare earth element, right? That's right. Neodymium is the star player in NdFeB magnets, neodymium iron boron. These are the most powerful permanent magnets we have, basically. Essential for making EV motors efficient and compact. They allow for more power in a smaller, lighter package.
And demand for rare earth overall, including neodymium, is set to double by 2040 under that net zero scenario for EVs and wind turbines, too.
Yeah, exactly. And one specific analysis from PMC really dug into the transport side. They reckon by 2030, just EVs could be using a quarter of all the NdFeB magnets produced globally. That kind of demand, they project, could lead to a major annual shortfall, something like 206,000 tons short per year by 2035.
2035 for neodymium shortages. Okay, now, unlike lithium, where's neodymium mainly coming from? Is it also spread out?
No, this is where it gets really concentrated. In 2024, global production of rare earth oxides was about 391,000 tons. China accounted for. Well, 69% of that, a huge majority. Global reserves are estimated over 44 million tons, but again, China holds the lion's share of those reserves too, around 44 million tons REO equivalent.
Okay, wait. Nearly 70% of production from just one country. That immediately flags a major risk, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. That heavy reliance on China creates significant geopolitical vulnerability. Think about policy changes, trade issues, any kind of disruption.
Hmm.
It could massively impact global supply. And the reports stress that bringing new, non-Chinese sources online is slow, it's expensive, and it's just not keeping up with demand projections.
So that concentration is the main driver for the projected 2035 shortage.
It's a huge factor. It makes the supply chain potentially fragile, meaning that shortage around 2035 could be quite serious and last for a while.
Right. Neodymium risk around 2035, driven by that production concentration. Okay, let's go back to the battery components. What about graphite?
Graphite, another really fundamental part of the battery, it's the anode material. It works with the cathode to, store and release the energy, essential for the battery's charge and discharge cycles.
And graphite demand is also set to soar. Quadruple by 2040, again, mostly driven by just needing way more batteries.
Precisely. Looking at 2024, global mine production was 1.6 million tons. And here we go again with concentration. China accounted for 79% of that mined graphite. 79%. There are big reserves elsewhere, sure. Brazil, Madagascar has significant amounts. Total global reserves are around 290 million tons. But mining is one thing. The processing of graphite into battery-grade material, that's even more concentrated in China.
79% dependency for mining and even more for processing. Wow, what does that imply for risk?
It means, well, extremely high geopolitical risk. The IEA specifically pointed this out using something called the N1 test. Basically, you imagine your biggest supplier disappears overnight. Could the rest of the world meet demand? For graphite, the answer seems to be no, not based on current projections.
So if something disrupted Chinese supply,
It could cause major problems very quickly. This mix of soaring demand and extreme concentration, especially in processing, leads reports to warn about serious shortages potentially hitting quite soon, maybe the mid to late 2020s.
mid to late 2020s for graphite, that's practically upon us. Even sooner than the peak risks for lithium and neodymium. Okay, let's talk cobalt.
Right, cobalt, another cathode material, often used in NCM and NCA batteries, the high-energy density ones. Its main job is to improve thermal stability, make the battery safer, and boost energy density. Although, yes, there's a big push to use less of it.
Yeah, I've heard about LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate becoming more popular, partly to avoid cobalt, but demand is still rising overall.
It is. The reports still see total cobalt demand doubling by 2040 in that NZE scenario.
Yeah.
Even with shifts in chemistry, the sheer number of batteries needed keeps demand high. But the supply side for cobalt has some really unique and significant challenges. Global production in 2024 was 290,000 tons. And get this, 76% came from just one country, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC. Global reserves are about 11 million tons.
DRC, that immediately brings up major concerns, right? Political instability and serious, well-documented ethical issues around mining, like child labor.
Exactly. And that's why the IEA flags the geopolitical and, frankly, the environmental and social risk for cobalt as particularly high. Having so much supply concentrated in a region facing those complex issues creates a really volatile situation. So the report suggests this combination rising demand hitting a highly concentrated and risky supply chain significantly ups the chance of shortages in the short to medium term.
Short to medium-term risk for cobalt, then, heavily tied to the DRC situation. Okay. Last one on our list, nickel.
Nickel, also a key cathode material in those energy-dense batteries like NCM and NPA. Its main benefit is helping pack more energy in, which translates to longer driving range for the EV, obviously crucial for a robotaxi.
And nickel demand, like cobalt, also projected to double by 2040.
That's the projection. Now, supply in 2024. Global production was about 3.7 million tons. The biggest player here was Indonesia, responsible for 59% of that total. Reserves globally are quite large, over 130 million tons.
Okay, so another concentration story, though maybe not quite as extreme as DRC for cobalt or China for graphite. Over half from Indonesia. What are the risks there?
Well, there are geopolitical risks just from that level of concentration, but also specific challenges around environmental regulations in Indonesia. Plus the energy needed for some processing methods, especially to get the high-purity nickel sulfate that batteries need. The IEA points to these factors, the geopolitical and environmental risks, and warns that even with large reserves, demand growth, particularly for battery-grade nickel, might just outrun the necessary production capacity growth.
And the timeline for potential nickel shortages. When might that bite?
The reports suggest the possibility of a nickel supply shortage emerging sometime in the 2030s.
Okay, let's just pull all that together. Looking at the overall picture from these May 2025 reports, it seems like we're facing a series of potential hurdles at different times, not one single crunch point.
That's a good summary, yeah. Based on how they see demand growing versus supply capacity and these concentration risks, it looks like graphite faces the earliest potential squeeze, maybe mid to late 2020s. Then lithium risk seems to peak a bit later, late 2020s into the early 2030s. Cobalt and nickel have risks building in the short to medium term, possibly causing problems into the 2030s. And then neodymium shortages look most likely to become severe around 2035.
So, thinking about building robotaxis, we might hit a graphite wall pretty soon, then potentially lithium issues, while keeping a worried eye on cobalt and nickel before the neodymium for the motors becomes the main headache around 2035. It definitely paints a more complex picture than just, uh-oh, EV minerals.
It really does.
Ah.
It shows the vulnerabilities are quite specific to each material situation. And it's really important to stress these are projections based on data as of May 30th, 2025. Things can change. New government policies, shifts in trade, maybe big tech breakthroughs in recycling, or completely new battery types or different motor designs. Any of that could definitely alter these timelines.
So what does this actually mean for you, listening to this? Whether you're excited for robotaxis or just thinking about EVs and clean energy generally, this deep dive really lays bare a fundamental challenge. All this amazing tech progress, these ambitious rollouts, they depend on getting stuff out of the ground from supply chains that are often complex, maybe even fragile.
Understanding these risks just helps you see the bigger picture, right? It's not just about code and sensors. It's about geology, geography, economics, geopolitics,
Yeah.
all feeding into whether we can actually build this future sustainably and securely.
Okay, so quick recap from the reports. Robo-taxi growth, part of the bigger EV shift, puts huge pressure on critical minerals. Graphite and lithium seem to face the earliest risks due to demand spikes and supply bottlenecks. Neodymium's challenge, mainly from concentration, looks likely to peak around 2035.
And the sources are clear. We need action. Investors, policymakers, they need to focus urgently on diversifying supply chains, getting serious about recycling to reuse these valuable materials, and funding research into alternative materials to ease the pressure.
Yeah. As we look towards this future of automated transport, widespread electrification, this deep dive really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? It's not just about can we design the tech, but can we reliably, sustainably source the basic building blocks? And what does it mean globally when the keys to that future tech are concentrated in just a few places? Something to think about.